The wind howled like a hungry predator, whipping the dense snow against the thick glass windows of the Blackwood Pack mansion. It was the peak of winter in the Blackwood territory, and the afternoon darkness felt like a lead blanket covering the vast wilderness, where the slender trees lay under a layer of ice that groaned with every gust. Inside the mansion, in the main hall, the contrast was brutal. Walls of dark stone and massive oak beams absorbed the weak light from a monumental fireplace, while thick Persian rugs and bear hides scattered on the floor signaled a cold opulence of ancient and unquestionable power. The atmosphere was charged with a silent military tension. 6 lieutenants, bulky figures in leather and fur uniforms, were arranged in a semicircle, their stony expressions reflecting the forced respect and silent fear that emanated from the figure seated at the head of the stone table. Supreme Alpha Kale dominated the space, tall and austere, his jaw clenched and his ice-blue eyes piercingly fixed on the reports about the territorial invasion. He wore a high-quality wool coat over a dark silk tunic. The richness of his attire was merely an accessory to the brute power that enveloped him, but, under his right sleeve, a constant twitch revealed the chronic pain from an old wound, a physical suffering he treated with the same cruelty he applied to his management. Absolute ignorance. The side door groaned, breaking the military discipline of the room. Lyra entered. She didn't burst in. She dragged herself as if every muscle in her body were a rope about to snap under the weight of denial and pain. Lyra was 23 years old, but her muscular thinness, resulting from years of strenuous work and minimal nutrition, gave her a fragile appearance that contrasted with the innate strength of her lineage. Her long dark hair was messily tied back, and her brown eyes, usually penetrating, were clouded with the internal fever that the wolf curse provoked. She wore servant clothes, a thick, worn-out fabric, a gray color that made her almost invisible, except for the aura of despair surrounding her, the scent of ozone and danger that only the oldest wolves could perceive. Her face was a mask of stubbornness contorted by the pain consuming her. The curse was at its peak, not only tormenting her uncontrollable wolf form, but also corroding her very flesh. She knew she was breaking Kaela's explicit order to keep her distance, to be invisible. But the cursed wolf inside her was a cold fire, promising to consume her sanity before it killed her. The sudden stop of the meeting was her signal. All eyes, filled with tribal contempt and revulsion, hit her. She felt the weight of the humiliation, but the urgency of her agony was greater than the fear of death. Lyra took a hesitant step, forcing the icy air into her already aching lungs, her knees almost buckling. The stone floor, previously firm, seemed to ripple beneath her feet. She could hear the murmuring disapproval of the lieutenants, the silent condemnation they barely bothered to disguise. Her presence, the cursed orphan, was an insult to the perfection of the Blackwood Pack. She didn't care about the offense. She just needed an answer. Kale raised his hand, a minimal gesture that froze the murmurs. His blue eyes, hard as obsidian, fixed on Lyra. His voice, when uttered, was low, controlled, yet carried the authority of a storm. "You received clear orders, servant. Leave, now." His coldness was the manifestation of his trauma. He couldn't afford to feel, much less acknowledge, the pain of someone he considered a dangerous variable to the stability of his power. Lyra ignored the order, which was, in itself, an act of social suicide. She clenched her fists, feeling her short nails dig into the skin of her palm. "I am not a servant," she whispered, and the truth in her voice made one of the lieutenants, a stocky man named Thurin, scoff in disdain. She took another step, forcing her body toward the flickering light of the fireplace, the source of warmth her body desperately craved, even knowing that heat wouldn't cure her curse. She looked directly at Kale, the sudden display of audacity coming from a place where pain had overcome reason. "My lineage was noble before your family took this territory," she stated, her voice slightly choked. "I demand to know the truth about this curse. I am dying, Alpha. Tell me why." The phrase was a knife in the silence, a direct affront to the secrecy of his leadership and the imposed order. Kale's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He stood up, the heavy oak chair scraping against the floor. His height and musculature made him an even more imposing figure, the embodiment of tribal power. His expression didn't change, but the air in the hall became scarcer, heavier, as if the atmospheric pressure had suddenly doubled. The twitch in the hand holding the report intensified, a sign of his internal pain being masked by a controlled fury, a rage he used as armor. "You dared!" Here, Kale hissed. But before he could advance, Lyra collapsed onto one knee. The pain was no longer bearable. It was a wave of black energy that seemed to tear her bones apart from the inside. The cursed wolf fought for its freedom, and the struggle was manifested externally. A low, hoarse, almost human howl of pain escaped her lips, not the sound of a full wolf, but the breaking of a soul. This howl, brief and devastating, resonated. The lieutenants recoiled, horrified by the manifestation of the curse, but Kale stopped. His blue eyes, for a microscopic fraction of a second, betrayed a flicker, not of fury, but of recognition and a very ancient fear. That sound was not the sound of an aberration, it was the sound of a lost mating, of a pain that only the most ancestral half of his own wolf could feel, and, inexplicably, protect. Lyra's humiliation was complete. She was a fallen, cursed creature, unable to control her own body in front of the man who held all the power. Her forehead touched the cold marble. The gesture that initiated the plot was not her request but her breaking. The small howl, the manifestation of her extreme vulnerability, had forced Kale to confront the inexplicable connection he felt. Kale did not touch her. He looked at the lieutenants, whose hands were on the hilts of their knives, ready for the summary execution that Lyra had provoked. He saw the future. Lyra dead, the end of a dangerous lineage, but also the end of something he couldn't name, something that tied him to humanity. "Step away," he commanded, his voice like thunder that made the snow outside tremble. The Alpha circled the table with the calculated slowness of a predator who doesn't need to rush. It stopped over Lyra, his shadow covering her completely. The scent of his power pine, ice, and authority suffocated Lyra, but, strangely, it gave the cursed wolf a momentary truce, a kind of forced peace. Lyra lifted her head, seeing Kel's boot next to her face. She expected the final blow, the phrase of repudiation that would condemn her to death and erase her useless existence. She was ready to accept the fate her curse had dictated since birth. Fear was an old companion, acceptance, a new, heavy cloak. But what came was not a blow. It was a sentence loaded with threat, but which, for Lyra, was a cruel reprieve. "You will not die here, servant," Kale said, but he corrected himself a second later. "You will not die now." He grabbed her arm, the strength of his grip like a vice. Lyra let out a pure cry of pain, not just from the rough touch, but from the feeling that her body was being dragged toward an uncertain destiny. The lieutenants watched, confused. Public condemnation was expected, not this possessive reaction. Kale dragged her out of the hall, ignoring the physical pain in his own leg, focusing all his energy on masking the flicker of fear that Lyra had provoked. The fear that, if he let her die there, something inside him, the last vestige of his protective side, would die with her. He pulled her down the icy, richly decorated corridors, a sickening contrast between the opulence of the mansion and Lyra's despair. Luxury animal furs hanging on the walls bore witness to the act of brute force. As Lyra stumbled, her legs unable to keep up with the Alpha's merciless pace, the destination was unmistakable. They descended a spiral stone staircase, shrouded in darkness and mold. The dungeon, the cellar used to isolate prisoners, the insane, and occasionally wolves who had become uncontrollable. It wasn't execution, but it was a prison, an act of calculated cruelty. Kale stopped in front of the darkest, dampest cell, the iron door creaking with a metallic and final sound. He shoved her inside with unnecessary violence, making her fall onto the damp straw. The smell of earth, sewage, and despair hit her. "Your punishment will not be the death your friends so desire." "Lyra," he said, his voice echoing off the cold stones. He locked the cell with the heavy padlock, the sound of the metal being a final stamp on her condemnation. "Your punishment will be seclusion and pain. Think about your insolence." But, as he walked away, Lyra saw that the twitch in Kyle's hand had intensified to the point of visibly trembling. He was suffering as much as she was. His punishment was a cruel act, but Lyra knew, instinctively, that Kyle was saving her, removing her from the sight of the lieutenants to prevent a summary execution. The act that humiliated her publicly was the same one that spared her. Do you want to know the secret Kale is hiding about Lyra? This story has just begun. Leave us a like if you're feeling the cold of Blackwood territory and comment what city you're watching us from. Now let's continue with the video. He turned, climbing the dark stairs. In the dungeon, Lyra huddled, her body shaking, feeling the icy solitude of that place. But there was a spark. She was alive. And Kale, the cold and ruthless alpha, had, for a moment, chosen the more difficult, less obvious path. Hours passed in the dungeon. Lyra huddled in the damp straw, the physical pain of the curse alternating with the weight of the recent humiliation. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by a thin ray of light coming from a small crack in the upper wall of the cell. This forced confinement, however, gave her time to delve into her past and the internal conflicts that had brought her to that point of despair. She was Lyra, the adopted orphan, whose lineage had been absorbed and then despised by the Blackwood Pack after her parents' fall in a territorial conflict 10 years earlier. An event shrouded in secrecy. Her internal conflict was the desperate desire for acceptance and the terror of her own nature. Since childhood, she had longed for the Pack's mental touch, the comforting warmth of the tribal connection that all Blackwood wolves shared. But her inner wolf, the core of her strength, was an aberration, a creature with black fur and red eyes, manifesting in involuntary fits of rage and pain, unable to communicate or submit to the hierarchy. This was the stigma, the curse of the she-wolf, which relegated her to the sidelines, a second-class guardian, eternally on the verge of exile or death. The iron door of the dungeon creaked, a dry, loud sound that echoed in the underground chamber. Lyra raised her head instinctively, her eyes wide, expecting the lieutenants to return for a harsher punishment, perhaps to finally execute her in secret. The shadow that stretched over the damp wall was tall and unmistakable. It was Kyle, the Supreme Alpha himself, coming to meet her in the most degrading place in the mansion. He was alone, wearing simpler clothes, but authority still emanated from him like a cold heat. Kyle did not immediately approach the cell. He stopped a few meters away, observing her. On his face, the mask of ruthless authority seemed a little fainter in the darkness, revealing deep lines of fatigue around his blue eyes. He carried with him the chronic pain of his old wound, visible in the way he leaned slightly against the wall. His trauma was the solitude of power, the belief that any emotional connection was a hole in the armor that his enemies would use to destroy the Pack. Lyra, in turn, represented the pure personification of enduring suffering. Thin, bruised, yet with eyes still carrying a stubborn hope that the truth would set her free. Her history of suffering was written in every poorly healed scar on her arms, in the instinctive self-defense gestures she adopted. She was a she-wolf of noble lineage, forced to live like a caged animal, and Kyle knew this. For he was the keeper of the Pack's secrets. "You should have stayed in your place," Kale finally said, his voice a harsh growl. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact that governed the survival of both of them. "Lieutenants had caught you red-handed in the darkness. I wouldn't have been able to intervene. You would be dead." He didn't use the word saved, but the implication was clear in the act of breaking his own rules of isolation to visit her. Lyra sat up, forcing dignity into her posture, despite the uncontrollable trembling. "And why didn't you let me die, Alpha?" She challenged him, the question a more real and emotionally charged dialogue than any formality. She needed to know the reason behind his cruel clemency. "I am a threat. I am the living curse." Kale approached the cell until their faces were separated only by the cold iron bars and the mist of his breath in the icy air. He hesitated, and in that moment, the emotional pause was worth more than any confession. It was the struggle of the pragmatic against the instinctive. He slowly extended his hand, not to touch her, but to rest his fingertips on the icy bars. "You are a threat that I control, Lyra," he replied. The lie was thin but necessary. "Your screams disturb the meeting, and that is a waste of military resources. You have fight potential. You will die serving Blackwood, not wallowing in damp straw." The explanation was cold, but Lyra felt the sting of a deeper truth in his voice, an acknowledgement of her innate strength that he refused to name. "Serve? My wolf is destroying me," Lyra retorted, her voice rising in an almost inarticulate lament. "I feel the cold fire, Kale. My parents, they died from this very thing. Tell me why my form is uncontrollable. What is the she-wolf's curse? And why can only the Supreme Alpha cure it? Is it a prophecy? The eye contact was intense, a sudden electricity crossing the iron bars. Her name, uttered in such an intimate tone of plea, made the muscle in Calais' jaw jump. He withdrew his hand as if the bars were glowing hot. His trauma of loss and the weight of responsibility were massive internal obstacles. The bureaucracy of tribal power demanded that he deny any weakness or mysticism. Prophecies are fairy tales for pups, he spat. Your lineage's curse is a genetic defect, nothing more. And I am not a healer. Cale closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, the coldness had returned, more potent. But you are useful, and I don't waste resources. He revealed his decision, transforming compassion into military pragmatism. I'm leaving on a mission tomorrow morning to the Eastern Territory. You will come with me. Not as a guardian, but as bait, a distraction, if necessary. The proposal was an insult, a new form of humiliation, but also an escape route. Lyra felt the bile rise. You want to use me to die? I want to use you to live, Cale corrected her sharply, but there was a restraint in the reply that prevented him from being totally cruel. If you survive, your lineage's curse can be suppressed with discipline and constant exposure to my command. Or die trying. Choose. The choice was illusory, yet real. The bureaucracy. Of slow death in the dungeon, or the risk of a quick and perhaps meaningful death. Lyra saw her chance. If the Alpha was taking her on a dangerous mission, it was because he knew she was the only anchor to a truth he feared. The emotional bond, although denied, was being forced by proximity. I will, Lyra replied, her voice firm despite the internal fear that her wolf would consume her and force Kyle to kill her. Good. Kyle nodded, but he didn't sound satisfied. He unlocked the padlock, opening the door just enough for her to step out. The sound of metal hitting the stone was the sound of destiny being sealed. Tension escalated the next morning. Lyra, wearing tougher yet still worn travel clothes, waited in the mansion courtyard where snow fell in large, heavy flakes. The lieutenants, led by Theron, who openly despised her, stood guard, their hostile glances palpable external obstacles. Theron approached, his voice a thinly disguised growl. The Alpha is making a mistake. This aberration will kill us before we reach the Eastern Territory. The social criticism was open, the tribal prejudice a knife in the icy air. I am Lyra of Blackwood, she responded, raising her chin. The answer was weak, but loaded with defiance. She was not a servant. She was a she-wolf of noble lineage, even if cursed. She used strength to repress the fear that they might be right. Cale emerged, the Alpha armor in all its splendor. A heavy coat of dark fur, military leather boots. He mounted his black stallion, a huge and fierce animal. The richness of his position contrasting with Lyra's simplicity, who would have to travel on foot. Silence, Kyle ordered Theron. He looked at Lyra, and the ensuing silence was an emotional dialogue. He knew he was exposing her, but he also knew he was protecting her from execution at the mansion. You will stay 30 meters away, Lyra. If you break that distance, I myself will return you in pieces to Theron. The journey began. The escape from the mansion was not for freedom, but for an even more dangerous territory. The Blackwood forest became a labyrinth of frozen pines, the cold deepening with every step. Lyra felt the weight of Kyle behind her, the pressure of his alpha aura controlling the cursed wolf. But the control was painful, a constant suffocation that weakened her. During the first nights of camping, the emotional connection between them grew involuntarily, like an illness. Lyra camped far away, watching Cale. From a distance, his silhouette against the fire. She noticed the way he touched his own leg, the chronic pain that afflicted him. She saw the loneliness in his eyes when he thought he was alone. One particularly cold night, Lyra, overwhelmed by the pain of the curse manifesting in chills and tremors, involuntarily stumbled toward the warmth of Cale's fire. She was 10 meters away when the manifestation of her wolf hit her. A spasm, and her eyes momentarily turned red, her skin taut, the scent of ozone and danger spreading. Cale jumped from his sleep, his weapon in hand, but he didn't fire it. He looked at her, and the fury on his face gave way to deep pain. Stop, Lyra, he commanded, but the voice was low, almost a whisper. Fight it. Don't force me to do this, Lyra writhed, the curse taking over. She didn't want to hurt him, but the cursed wolf yearned for the annihilation of Cale's power. He was forcing her to use his alpha power to subdue her, a painful act that strengthened the bond but hurt her. He needed control. She needed healing. Kale approached, and the alpha instinct prevailed. He grabbed her by the collar, his inhuman strength lifting her. He shook her, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. "I am the alpha," he growled, the voice of command forcing Lyra's wolf to temporarily retreat. Lyra's curse was subdued. She collapsed on the ground, crying from exhaustion and shame. Kale released her, looking at his own hands, where cold sweat mixed with the electricity of the connection was visible. He quickly moved away, returning to the dark side of the fire. "I didn't ask for your help," Lyra whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't give it," Kale replied, the answer being the greatest confession of his internal conflict. "I demand order. If your wolf consumes you, it distracts me. You are my responsibility now. Remain stable." The tension between them was almost sexual in its intensity, the attraction between the controller and the controlled, between the healer and the sick. The forced bond, however, brought mutual knowledge. Lyra began to read Kale's micro-gestures, the twitch in his leg, the way he avoided talking about his parents' death, the trauma of losing his brother, whom he felt he had failed to protect. She saw the emotional poverty beneath the wealth of his power. He, in turn, saw the unwavering hope beneath Lyra's pain. He noticed how she treated the injured animals they found, the purity of her desire to be part of something. He began to give her specific orders, not to humiliate her, but to test her responsiveness, which gradually restored the self-confidence the pack had stolen from her. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. They delved into the dangerous territory, the journey becoming increasingly a test of survival. They were attacked by smaller wolves and renegade hunters, forcing Kale and Lyra to fight side by side, despite their imposed distance. The fight was a clumsy and dangerous ballet, where Lyra used her raw, uncontrolled wolf strength and Kale, his tactical precision. With each combat, Kale's power to subdue her became less painful, and Lyra's wolf, although still cursed, seemed more responsive to the alpha's command. What Kale saw as control was, for Lyra, the first feeling of belonging and order she had ever known. The connection was becoming stronger, more affectionate. The final obstacle arose in the form of a rival to Kale, an exiled former alpha who craved power, who had joined an ancient magical entity, the same one that supposedly cast the original curse on Lena's lineage. The confrontation was imminent, in the heart of the Eastern Territory, an icy clearing marked by dark magic. Kale stopped at the edge of the clearing, looking at the battlefield. He turned to Lyra, and for the first time, there was no coldness in his blue eyes, but a grave resignation. "This is not about territory, Lyra. It's about the power that unites us and the power that destroys us." Lyra felt the pressure of the moment. Her curse was at its peak, the scent of dark magic infuriating her. But instead of giving in, she took a deep breath. Remembering Kale's order to fight to live, she knew this was the decisive moment, the point of no return. The forced bond would become salvation or ultimate destruction. The clearing in the Eastern Territory was a desolate stage for the confrontation, enveloped in a cold, magical mist that seemed to suck away sound and color. The figure of the rival alpha, a man named Vorn, stood in the center, accompanied by the magical entity, a shapeless shadow that pulsed with the black energy of the ancestral curse. Kale and Lyra advanced, but the presence of the magic was overwhelming, and the cursed wolf inside Lyra began to struggle with an intensity never before felt, threatening to consume her completely. Warren, a large muscular wolf, scoffed when he saw Lyra. Staggering, the great Kale Blackwood, hiding behind a cursed aberration. "Is your power so weak that you need her pain to feel strong?" The humiliation was intentional, aimed at destabilizing Kale, who protected his reputation with his life. The attack was swift. Kale plunged into the fight with the calculated precision of a trained warrior, ignoring Vorn, focusing on the magical entity, which was the real source of power. Lyra tried to help, but the curse hit her like a lightning bolt. An excruciating pain that made her fall to her knees, the snow floor mixing with cold sweat. Her eyes turned scarlet, and the howl of pain, now more potent, was proof that she was about to transform into her uncontrollable form. Kale heard the howl, and the sound paralyzed him for an instant. He was in the middle of a fatal blow against Vorn, but turned his head, seeing Lyra struggling against the darkness. The trauma of his past, the failure to protect his brother, resurfaced. He was, once again, Forced to choose the survival of his pack, which required the elimination of Vorn, his rival, or Lyra's life, which he protected with his heart, even if secretly. The climax was the choice. Chaol let go of Vorn, who staggered backward, shocked by the surrender. The Alpha moved with fierce speed, but not toward the enemy. He ran toward Lyra, who was convulsing in agony. The act was one of surrender to his human side, a confession that her connection was more important than his power. Vorn shouted in triumph. Lyra was on the brink, the cursed wolf tearing at her being. Chaol reached her, falling to her side, ignoring the imminent danger from Vorn. He held her firmly by the shoulders, forcing eye contact, and the transformative dialogue began, breaking years of repression. "Lyra, look at me. You will not leave me," Chaol growled, the pure alpha accent in his voice. "I saved you from execution because, even cursed, you are the last piece of truth left in me. My pain is the loneliness of power, and you, with your pain and your hope, prevent me from becoming the monster they want me to be." Lyra gasped. The confession was a painful but real balm. She saw the honesty in his blue eyes, the deep fear that her curse would separate them forever. She felt the touch of Chaol's power, no longer as subjugation, but as a protective anchor. "I feel your fear, Chaol," she whispered, her voice hoarse with pain. "Don't abandon me. I don't want to be ... an aberration." She was kissing the threshold of losing control. Chaol made the final decision. "Fight, Lyra, fight for yourself. Not for me, not for the pack, but for your own being." He pulled her to him, and in a gesture of desperation and surrender, he kissed her with a possessive ferocity. The contact being an act of wolf mating, not lust, but of pure union and necessity. The kiss was the turning point. A massive transfer of alpha power, a confession that she was his Luna companion. Chaol's strength didn't cure her, but reconfigured her. Lyra's power, which was being drained by the curse, was now channeled by Chaol's acceptance, transforming it into a force of union. Lyra's howl turned into a powerful roar, black fur emerging on her arms, but this time, her eyes were golden brown, not scarlet. She embraced her wolf, and Chaol's power transformed the pain into purpose. Vorn attacked at that moment, but Lyra transformed, moved with instinctive precision, defending Chaol. The final fight was quick, with Lyra and Chaol fighting as one, the Alpha giving the orders and the cursed She-Wolf moving in perfect sync. The power of the bond was unbreakable. Vorn and the magical entity were repelled and destroyed by the force of the union. Chaol stood up, panting, looking at Lyra, who was in her near-Volf form but controlled. He approached and touched her face. "We won, together. No curse can withstand a true bond." The touch, once feared, was now the seal of their new reality. Pain had transformed into power. The climax was over. Chaol's choice, prioritizing Lyra over power, had changed Blackwood's trajectory forever. The return to Blackwood territory was a concrete change. Not just geographical but spiritual. Lyra and Kalair returned victorious, but most importantly, they returned united. The cold opulence of the Pack Mansion seemed to yield slightly to the new dynamic. Lyra was no longer the outcast or the servant. She was the Luna. Her new position was not earned by birth but by fire and mutual loyalty, a truth that even the most stubborn lieutenants like Theron could not deny upon witnessing the controlled calm of Lyra's wolf. The curse was broken, or, more accurately, transformed. Lyra's wolf was no longer a force of destruction, but of contained power. She discovered that she could transform into her full wolf form, a black, powerful, and agile Shie, wolf without losing control of her mind. This was due to the constant and genuine presence of Chaol's command, which now functioned as an anchor of love and acceptance, rather than forced repression. His touch, once suffocating, was now the acknowledgement of her strength. Kale became a fairer leader and noticeably less bitter. The chronic pain in his leg, although still present, seemed to diminish, as the burden of loneliness had been removed. Lyra taught him that the true strength of an alpha does not lie in his ability to repel vulnerability, but in his ability to protect and embrace it. He began to make decisions with a strategic compassion, considering individual well-being instead of just military survival. The first visible change in the pack was the attitude toward the rejected. Lyra, remembering her own loneliness, convinced Chaol to open the mansion to other wolves with defects or minor curses, those who had been expelled by other packs for not fitting the mold of perfection. They created a refuge, a new block in the mansion dedicated to welcoming and rehabilitating these wolves. Lyra did not just take the title of Luna. She took on the role of healer of the pack's soul. She used her experience of suffering to teach young wolves to channel their weaknesses into strengths. She proved that acceptance was a power stronger than brute force, a revolutionary philosophy for the Blackwood territory, historically governed by fear. The contrast between material wealth and the new emotional wealth was evident. The mansion, still imposing and rich, no longer exuded cold oppression. Fires crackled louder, and laughter, once rare, now echoed through the stone corridors, especially coming from the refuge wing. Kale watched Lyra interact with the other wolves, and the pride in his blue eyes was the true jewel of the pack. Kale's family reconciliation with his own past was a remarkable act. He finally visited his brother's grave, something he had avoided for years due to the trauma of loss. Lyra accompanied him, and he confessed that his emotional closing was a form of self-imposed punishment for not being strong enough to protect. Lyra reminded him that strength was not omnipotence, but the ability to rise after a fall. The moral message of the story was crystal clear. Love and genuine acceptance were the supreme power, capable of breaking not only ancestral curses, but also the emotional barriers of self-imposed loneliness. The pack learned that compassion was not weakness, but the foundation for lasting stability, something military force alone could never provide. The outcome was inspirational because it showed that Lyra, the cursed she-wolf, had become Kale's cure, the invincible alpha, and Kala, the cold alpha, had become Lyra's safe harbor. They completed each other, transforming a regime of oppression into a beacon of second chances and human kindness. Winter remained harsh in the Blackwood territory, but the Pack Mansion, now under the command of Lyra and Kyle, had a different warmth. Its sounds of hooves and children's laughter echoed, mixing with the smell of pine and fire. Kale and Lyra were parents to 2 wolf pups, a boy and a girl, with the father's piercing blue eyes and the mother's unwavering stubbornness. Kale, with 50% of his time dedicated to the pack, and Lyra, with 50% dedicated to her new foundation, the She-Wolf's Refuge, were on a reconnaissance round. The journey took them to the edge of the forest, where the snow was densest and the silence most oppressive. They found a small bundle abandoned in the snow, an orphan. A human child, left to die in the cold. Lyra looked at Kyle, and in his eyes, there was no doubt of the past, only the certainty of the present. Lyra's trauma and pain made her incapable of ignoring vulnerability. Kale knelt, picking up the child with the same tenderness he denied himself for decades. The cycle was closing. The alpha who once rejected pain, now embraced suffering. Lyra, the rejected orphan, was now rescuing another child, passing on the pack's new philosophy. They returned to the warmth of the mansion, Lyra hand in hand with Kale, the orphan child nestled in the alpha's arms. The cursed wolf had become the Luna, and the cruel alpha had become a father and a protector. The Blackwood Pack Mansion was, finally, a home. Have you done any gesture of kindness that changed a life, like Lyra and Kyle? Drop a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances, and comment love has no price if you also believe in human kindness.